Hello, everybody. This is Erin Lefebvre, and I'm here to talk about the Wounds of Herbalism. Now, this is in response to the article, the post I shared from Tara Wild about misappropriation of herbs used for what is described as smudging. So I've had some questions come up in the various places that I've posted that article by Tara Wild, the post that she had on her website and her Facebook. So I'm here to address what is I call the wounds of herbalism. And it has to do with the misappropriation of certain herbs and of the certain traditions that are used. And so that's what I'm talking about today on this live recording of the Herbs podcast. And Herbs stands for Herbs with Erin, Remedies for Body and Spirit. So this will be turned into a podcast as well today. And I'm on Spotify and iTunes. So what does it mean to have the wounds of herbalism? Well, some of the information that we use in the United States of America, we have an amalgamation of herbal information because, of course, America is the United States, North America region as a melting pot of cultures, traditions, ethnicities, and all that herbal information has come through and mixed together in what is known as Western herbalism. Well, at the formation of this country, there were things happening where the immigrants that coming in many times were telling Native American Indian tribes that they weren't living the proper way, that they weren't doing things right, that they were dirty, that their religion wasn't right, that they were heathens, and they were told to assimilate into the immigrant culture. And that was done in a lot of ways. Some violent, definitely genocide took place. And at the same time, the herbal information and healing ways were taken or used from them. And sometimes those were even monetized. So we have historical text of all this herbal information that was shared, sometimes willingly, sometimes not, shared to the immigrants, to the people coming here to the United States of America, to form the United States of America. And then the people they took it from, they told, weren't doing things the right way. So that is where some of the wounds come into play. There are other places in the world where this is still happening. And scientists will go into regions, ask for their information on how they heal certain things or how they treat certain illnesses. And then they say, okay, thank you. They take the information, they go make medicines, they over-harvest the plants from the area where the people were that they got the information from, and they monetize the information. So the people that they got the information from do not get to benefit from the monetization of the information. So that would be a misappropriation of the information. Now, if we go back to Tara Wild's post, the one I shared, they also she talks about smudging and white sage. Now, smudging is a term that I thought was ubiquitous, like the term sweeping, like it was just something that was used through all cultures. And really, the term smudging is very much associated with Native American Indian tribes here in the United States. From my perspective here, where I live, smudging is really associated with Native American Indian tribes of different, not all tribes, use this word, not all First Nations people use this word, and there's certainly other synonyms for this particular practice. So stay with me here. We're going to get into why this can be a problematic thing. So smudging is typically what many mainstream people know right now here in the United States. Smudging is taking white sage that's been dried, burning it, and then using the smoke to what's called cleanse the space of negative energies and things like that. So, seems like a pretty normal thing to be able to burn herbs and then use the smoke for various purposes. But we must remember that here in the United States of America, it wasn't until the late 70s, and I believe 1978, where it was legal, where the United States government actually said, by the way, we're going to give you the right to be legally practicing your traditional ways. And this was like a blanket statement for all of the tribes and the nations within the United States of America. So remember, in the United States of America, we have nations within nations, because Native American Indian tribes, the First Nations, they are nations. They have their own set of laws and processes. And so United States of America has made treaties with Native American Indian tribes. So we have nations within nations. And the United States government said to those nations, oh, by the way, we're not going to prosecute you in any way now with this American Indian Religious Freedom Act, I believe it was called, in the late 70s. So people are still alive that remember this, that remember that if they did things like smudging or had their traditional dances or their gatherings, that they could be prosecuted, they could be sent to jail, or whatever it was that happened with those types of processes. So that is why there's a resurgence and understanding and sensitivity that we people who are not of these excuse me, American Indian tribes, who don't have the affiliation or whatever, there's lots of different ways that each nation holds its membership or its affiliation or its lineage. But that if you're not of that particular group, don't have that connection, and now you have a store or something and you start selling the traditional ways that are not of that particular culture of your own, then you may want to consider that perhaps there's a misappropriation, that you're monetizing, you're benefiting off of somebody else's lineage, which has a huge history of violence, eradication, genocide, terrible, terrible things happen to those, to the Native American Indian tribes and nations in the United States. And now they're seeing their traditional ways and medicines on the shelf of big box stores and things like that. White sage has been shown up in malls and all sorts of places and catalogs. So if you can imagine living during a time when it was illegal to be doing these things by the government of the United States of America, and then suddenly people are just now just selling it like nothing happened, not giving any not even acknowledging that it's from a different cultural tradition or lineage of your own. It can be problematic. So these are great conversations coming up in the herbal community. I mean, they've always been there, but we're seeing them, kind of come up into the social media more and more, and having conversations about this. And so the wounds of herbalism for me mean that we must acknowledge that not all plant herbal information came about in Western herbalism in a nice, fun, happy way. And so we must acknowledge that. And also, I have white sage right here. I call this white sage, but there are many kinds of white sage, plants called white sage. This one is Artemisia ludovicina. It grows here on the land. it's native, it's indigenous. I don't really like to use those terms so much, but it is known to grow here on its own. It hasn't been introduced. It's not like something like, I'm trying to think of something that's been introduced here that's growing like crazy, like Norway spruce or something like that. It's been here a long time. This is a plant that I grow and that I harvest and that I use. And it's been traveling with me from place to place for probably 20 years at least. So the white sage that's typically talked about in these smudging bundles and that is being over harvested is a kind that is what I call California sage. It's got a stronger smell, and that one has been known, Salvia apiana, I think it's called. That one has been known to be over harvested now because of the commercialization of it. It's become a commodity, right? So certainly people grow their own. There's different kinds of sage out there, white sage, many, that's kind of the common names can be problematic because it's a name that is used for multiple kinds of plants out there. So that's why this post by Tara Wild came out, because she's addressing what I call the wounds of herbalism, and bringing up the awareness and the sensitivity that things have been taken from other cultures and monetized, commercialized, commodified, and that is problematic. This is something I'm going to talk more about up in my upcoming Herbal Beginnings workshop as well. That's happening in December. A couple people on my Facebook posts, when I shared Tara Wild's, shared her post, they said, well, what about we do things like we use yoga. I mean, we use, there are even, what am I trying to say? Saunas. Like, these are from other cultures. How come that's okay? And I would say that perhaps that is something to think about, that, yoga is a practice that comes from another place in the world, and, United States of America, another culture. It has its own practices and traditions, and it's a sacred teachings to it. And it has also been commodified in the United States. So there is a potential that that's been misappropriated as well. And saunas and all these things taken from, because we're a melting pot. There's lots of people coming here, bringing their cultures, their traditions, their teachings. And so it also comes down from perspective and from the intention. So if the people where this practices came from start to say, hey, we think you're using our practices in a way that's not in a sacred intent, and they're not being used the way we do, and we have an issue with that, I think it's my duty, from my perspective, to listen to that and to take that into consideration. So yes, there are other things that have been commodified and monetized, and if the culture or the lineage or the ethnicity or whatever that information's been taken from, if they start to say we have some issue with that, what I do is listen and try to adjust and be respectful and have conversation and learn more. So that's what it comes down to. So if people are saying, hey, stop using this term smudging and taking our traditions and commodifying it, and not even giving us reparations in terms of saying, hey, this is from another culture, giving that kind of respect, then I want to listen. So other people will say, well, plants are natural, they're everywhere, and totally get that. I think that herbal medicines, herbalism, plants, magic, it is a birthright to everybody, and it is here. And we also have to be sensitive to the wounds of herbalism. Both of them are true. So there's lots of plants that I'm using, that I grow, in my garden that doesn't necessarily naturally grow in my space, but that I have brought it forth. And I'm also very aware of that and sensitive about letting it spread where it doesn't need to spread, and understanding that when I teach the information to other people, and if it is of a lineage of not my own that I'm aware of, then, I say that and make sure that I acknowledge that. So there are things that I'm sure that plants that I'm using that that came through Western herbalism that may have some came through through herbalism in a not so helpful way through Western herbalism. And when I know better, I do better. Then I definitely am sensitive if anybody says, hey, wait a minute, that teaching that that you're saying, there's some pieces missing to that, and it comes from this other culture. And when I learn about that and know about that, then I make adjustments. Just like with the term smudging, once I realized that, like, hey, this really is associated with Native American Indian cultures here in the United States, and though there are definitely wounds of how that information came, then I adjust. And I can use other words like fumigatory and sacred smoke and cleansing smoke. So there are many things that I can do. I can still use the herbs that are here, like this white sage, because I grow it. I've been gifted it. That's another thing. If you're gifted it, that is culturally sensitive as well. And if other cultures, give proper permissions and give you kind of the blessing to also bring the information forth. So I know many of us have multiple heritages and lineages, and I'm from Europe area, like the whole European area, and then farther back I go down into Italy, and then my DNA does link me to the African DNA female that they have got in that DNA from a particular skeletal remains of an African a woman who was originated in what we now call Africa. So, I definitely have lots of lineages, but and I think that I have the birthright to be accessing any herb that grows around me, but I'm also acknowledging that there are wounds to herbalism, and there's books on this. There is one, I'll probably share it in the Facebook group or the Facebook page. And it's our knowledge is not primitive. And that is by Wendy McCoons. And again, I'll share that spelling with you in posts and things like that. And in this, I know some people are watching on YouTube right now. So I wanted to come address some of the comments that were coming through on that post that I shared of Tara Wild's, and people saying, well, hey, wait a minute, we use saunas and we use yoga and we use all these other things. So how come that's okay? And again, it's intention and it's perspective. And when somebody says, hey, that's from our culture and you're misappropriating it, then I listen. So I'm going to, again, talk more and share more about this in my upcoming Herbal Beginnings 2-day journey that we're doing on December 8th and 9th. But I didn't want to ignore those people who are asking questions on my Facebook post, and I thought it would be best to come just do a live and talk through that with you, because there's many, many facets, just like most things. There's many pieces to the puzzle. So, all right. I see some of you watching. Thanks for joining in. And this is a live episode recording of the Herbs podcast. So take care, everybody.